How much did Dominic Williams impact the Oklahoma Sooners too deep along the defensive line? Let's discuss on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started today. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. And the big news over the last week was the recruitment of Dominic Williams, the commitment to the Oklahoma Sooners of Dominic Williams. And I think the assumption can be made that he's coming to Oklahoma and he's plugged in right as your nose tackle starter along the defensive line. But it makes you wonder, okay, what does the rest of the defensive line look like in the two deep? We saw our man George Stoya over at Sooner Scoop get asked this question. And so it was really intriguing. I liked his answer. But Josh, what do you make of where Oklahoma is going to be headed along the defensive line this fall?
I don't think there's any question. Dominic Williams is a plug-and-play starter for Oklahoma, given his production, what it looked like the last couple of years at TCU. So what does it mean for the two deep? He swallowed up a starting spot. I think, yes, that is definitely true for Oklahoma, and probably a good handful of the snaps. Oklahoma will want to rotate bodies, want to keep guys fresh. You always, to some degree, want to do that on the interior, but I would venture a guess that Dominic Williams is going to have a great chance to wind up with the largest percentage share of snaps next season among defensive tackles. I think that that's a possibility for him. So I think from that standpoint, it affects the trickle down for Oklahoma to some degree. I do think that he's a bona fide starter. I probably would agree with, I think, most out there that Dejon Terry would be the other projected starter for Oklahoma right now, though obviously Jayden Jackson turned heads in the spring. You think about Jermayne Lole coming into the mix, who's an experienced body. I have been very outspoken with my impressions of Grayson Halton throughout this spring season for Oklahoma. So again, Dominic Williams, bona fide starter. I think he's going to get the most snaps for Oklahoma along its interior. But beyond that, I don't know. I'm kind of wait and see.
I think it's interesting, looking at George's projection, he's got both Dejon Terry and Dominic Williams in the starting lineup. And I really look at that and I'm like, okay, I feel like Williams, Terry, Lole, and Jackson are all very similar defensive tackle types. It reads redundancy to me a bit. And that's not to say that George is wrong. I mean, I think we're all kind of just guessing and projecting based on what we know. I really feel like they're going to find a way to get a Grayson Halton in there, or if they really believe that Dominic Williams has that quick twitch explosiveness like Grayson Halton does, that can play that three technique defensive tackle spot. Because from what I gather, he's been more of a nose tackle type, like Dejon Terry, like Jayden Jackson, Lole. I'm not exactly sure where all he's played along the defensive line, but I'm sure these guys can do a little bit of everything. But you want to get a little bit of juice in there somehow and not just have these big, run stuffing, type defensive linemen. That's not to say they can't rush the passer, but yeah, you just don't really have a lot of like quick penetrating explosiveness. It's a lot of strength, a lot of girth. And I mean, maybe they can be that. Maybe they can, work on that part of their game and add that quick twitch where they can just dart through the defensive line and get there. But it looks, and even if you just look at that projected, two deep, and it's got Ethan Downs at one defensive end, and it was R. Mason Thomas at the other defensive end. I mean, you're very much set up to defend the run really, really well if it's Ethan Downs, Dejon Terry, Dominic Williams, and R. Mason Thomas as your front four. I mean, and that's going to be, a big step to being successful on defense this year in the SEC in particular, is stopping the run. yeah, I think I just need a little bit more juice. I need a little bit more pass rush capability out of the defensive tackle group, whoever it comes from.
Well, it's borderline criminal to have 5 minutes of a defensive tackle conversation, not say the two words David Stone. Yeah, so that's borderline criminal of us. But if we're talking about that kind of juice, right, that a Grayson Halton could maybe provide, certainly a David Stone, maybe this is just an Oklahoma defense that's very heavy in names like Dominic Williams and Dejon Terry, Jayden Jackson on the first and second down situations. And then when it's time to pin your ears back and go get a quarterback, that's where you get heavy in the snaps for a Grayson Halton, for a David Stone, or whoever emerges in that pass rushing type capacity in the interior. And I would take that outside as well and say the same thing for somebody like a PJ Adebaware that would seem to have those natural pass rushing type skills for Oklahoma. But yeah, that initial four that would be projected there with Dominic Williams, with Dejon Terry, with Ethan Downs, and with R. Mason Thomas, that's pretty sturdy against the run. And it does probably need to start there for Oklahoma in the SEC.
And listen, I don't mind, if they really feel like Dominic Williams can be that 3 technique defensive tackle, somebody who's lining up between the guard and the tackle and trying to, create more penetration as opposed to just eating up double teams where that's more the Dejon Terry kind of role. If they're saying, hey, Dejon Terry is going to be the nose tackle and you're going to be the 3 tech and you're not going to see as many double teams, that might have been something that was somewhat enticing to a Dominic Williams to not have to come to Oklahoma and be that nose tackle. So that could make a lot of sense too. So I like the projection and how crazy it is that we're looking at this defensive tackle group and we're like, dang, they've got a lot of depth. And you're looking at the 3, going 3 deep and you haven't mentioned David Stone yet. I mean, because if you go to that nose tackle, I mean, Jayden Jackson could be your 3rd string nose tackle. And if he's your 2nd string, defensive tackle, then is David Stone your 3rd string defensive tackle? It's just crazy to think of how much better the depth is going into this season than it was this time a year ago. It's awesome recruiting job by Venables and Bates and Miguel Chavis and now Zach Alley. They're just really crushing it, making sure Oklahoma is loaded at defensive tackle moving forward. And
in no small part, obviously, because they had a couple of big wins in the spring transfer portal. It wouldn't be a totally precarious conversation for Oklahoma minus Dominic Williams and Jermayne Lole, but it would be a different conversation for Oklahoma inside, no doubt. So they've really helped themselves by getting those 2 guys, frontline starter, definitely in Dominic Williams, and probably somebody in Lole that we just need to see, but will be, equally impactful from a depth standpoint, just to some of those other names we mentioned, not at the top of the board like Dominic Williams, but the youngsters, the Jayden Jacksons, the Stones, the Haltons. Lole's going to have every opportunity, as with those guys, to impact Oklahoma next season. So yeah, they've reshaped that room. And, you think about where you were when you got the bad news for Jacob Lacey. Now, all of a sudden, you've really restocked the situation. Yeah, it's so much better. And a guy like Lole could end up being the best of them because we've seen him have elite production back at his time at Arizona State. Now, that's a few years ago, but if he can get healthy and get right and be right the rest of this offseason and into the 2024 season, he could be a big-time impactful player at defensive tackle. How sweet it is to have that defensive tackle depth. We think the offensive line depth is going to be okay, but ESPN, not so sure. Let's hear what they had to say coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. That's right. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. And oh, by the way, for the Thunder faithful out there, are you starting to feel a little bit better about those 7-1 odds for OKC to potentially win its first NBA championship. If you buy into the idea that you need the defending champion Denver Nuggets bounced, well, Minnesota might be doing some heavy lifting for you in that regard. But again, you can find all of those numbers, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The offensive line has been a topic of much discussion this offseason as we look to see how Bill Bedenbaugh and the offensive staff rebuilds and retools a line that lost all 5 starters from the 2023 season. I say 5 starters plus because also Troy Everett is gone, and you're down a veteran center that was projected to start for you. But offensive line has been retooled with some really intriguing names: Jacob Taylor, Jacob Sexton, Fabetu Wiwu, Michael Tarkin, some youngsters like Heath Ozida, Josh Bates. The addition of Branson Hickman as well at center allows you to have a very competitive position battle across the offensive line. And I think we saw some promising things from the spring game, heard some promising things from spring ball, but it is still an area that will be watched and watched quite heavily. Probably won't feel comfortable about where they are until we get through maybe the Texas game. But you look at ESPN, they did overreactions for each of their top 25 teams for the 2024 season. You know, some areas like with Tennessee and Nico, they believe he's going to be a Heisman contender. With the Oklahoma Sooners, though, they're concerned about the offensive line still. And here's what they had to say. Oklahoma lost 5 offensive linemen who made up the bulk of its starts and career snaps, not to mention its offensive coordinator and Dylan Gabriel. Not ideal heading into its first SEC season, but the Sooners boast one of the top offensive line coaches in the country in Bill Bedenbaugh, who is piecing together transfers from Washington, Michigan State, and USC, among others. So, man, yeah, like it's one of those. Oh, and then he talks about the Sooners will be able to move the ball, and if the defense under new coordinator Zach Alley can keep the Sooners from becoming one-dimensional, that will allow Luttrell to scheme his way out of any growing pains up front. I mean, I think, listen, I'm not going to sit here and overreact that the offensive line is going to be bad this year. I'm not going to make any big proclamations. I think it's going to be good enough. And I think the skill talent around the offensive line is going to be good enough to make up for maybe some of the lacking production or lacking talent that maybe the O-line was going to have, but it's still a concern.
It's the probably most obvious place for everybody to point to with Oklahoma for where it could go wrong. If you're not just saying that Jackson Arnold isn't the Jackson Arnold that everybody wants and hopes, the 5-star quarterback, then the obvious place to point to would be offensive line for Oklahoma. I would say, though, for me, and I've been sort of banging on this drum, I think, for a little while now, offensive line has the chance over the course of the season to dramatically improve. You got Coach Bedenbaugh. His hallmark historically has been he develops guys. The last couple of NFL draft picks from Oklahoma along the offensive line, high draft picks, did not start their careers at Oklahoma, and yet guess what? Bill Bedenbaugh got him into the National Football League as first round draft picks. And so it took time, and with some of these offensive lines in the course of seasons, it's taken a little bit of time to see the results that everybody wants. The way college football is set up is that it does allow you to take your time a little bit with some losses that you might incur if you can avoid the blow-up season. So for Oklahoma, is this just going to be a disaster unit if it's Michael Tarkin at left tackle and Jake Taylor at right and the 2 guards, Sexton and Wiwu and Hickman at center? I don't think so. I think over the course of the season, it has a chance to be pretty good. So for me, my big fear for Oklahoma remains the Oklahoma defense will not morph into elite. That's for me the biggest puzzle piece for Oklahoma. You went out and you went hot into the paint, man. You went charging into the paint, trying to dunk over LeBron to get Dominic Williams, and you got him. So you got him. You brought Danny Stutzman back. You brought Billy Bowman back. So the largest key for Oklahoma is its defense resembling a Brent Venables defense in his third year running the show. If that doesn't happen, then all of Oklahoma's large goals, they will not arrive. And it'll be easy to maybe point to, wait a second, this offensive line is taking time, and Jackson Arnold hasn't been the superstar quarterback that we hoped straight away. But if Oklahoma's defense is elite, John, it will allow Jackson Arnold some growing pains. It will allow that offensive line some growing pains, because I don't think Oklahoma's offensive line is just going to be this big, complete disaster. I could see it being a work in progress, but a total disaster, I don't see that being the case for Oklahoma. So for me, my spring overreaction, if I have to pick one, is that Oklahoma's defense lets us down in some way, shape, or form relative to not reaching that elite bar that it's year 3. It's time to kind of reach that point.
Yeah, and that's what they need to be. I mean, this is the time for the Oklahoma defense to step up and say, hey, listen, this is going to be our team. We're going to lead the way for this team as we break in a new starter at quarterback, as we work in a new offensive line. You got to have your defense step up, and you've got enough leadership on that defense. You've got enough talent on that defense for them to ascend and be the defense that we expect them to eventually be under Brent Venables. But the time is now for that to be the case. All they have to do is get a little bit healthy, have a little bit of health luck, especially with a guy like Gentry Williams at cornerback, because if he's healthy and he's going all 14, 15, 16, 17 games, then you're going to be in a really, really good position in the passing game. You got to get some pass rush. You got to get R. Mason Thomas. He's got to be able to be contributing every single week for you, because if you do, we talked about having that explosiveness, that burst, that juice off the edge. Well, R. Mason Thomas has it in spades. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. But if those two guys can stay healthy for a full season, I mean, that works wonders for your defense. Obviously, the Danny Stutzman loss from a year ago was a big, big loss during the Kansas and Oklahoma State games. But the in and out of the lineup from Gentry Williams, not really having much explosive pass rush, that hurt as well. And that made it really, really difficult for Oklahoma to maintain that early season success throughout the entire season when you didn't have a lot of consistency at cornerback or at edge rusher. As you're starting to, I mean, that's the next step. I mean, this team was pretty good against the run at times. This team was able to create pressure with the blitz pretty regularly, but now you got to be able to figure out a way to get pressure with 3 men, with 4 men, and not have to send the blitz and be able to drop everybody into coverage and win with just a 4-man front. That's the next step for the Sooners team, is being able to win with a 4-man front much more consistently than they were last year.
Sorry, I froze on you for a second, but I'm back with you, John. Yes,
Right.
I hear you. They got to be able to do that with that type of front on a regular basis to achieve their goals. Just on the surface, to the question itself, right? Could that be an overreaction? Could it be the pothole to Oklahoma? Surface level, yes. I understand the concern with Oklahoma's offensive line. I maybe steered this conversation in a totally different direction, John, but I think within the walls of this Oklahoma fan base, that's reasonable to hope that Oklahoma turns the corner defensively, and that really, if you're talking big picture goals, that might be the link that holds Oklahoma back, if in fact Oklahoma's held back. But to the point itself, look, Oklahoma's replacing a lot up front across its offensive line. Now, they went and tried to supplement in a big way out of the transfer portal, and they're going to need Fabechi Wiwu to help them, right? They might yet need Spencer Brown to help them. Hickman, probably going to have to be a player for Oklahoma, or could very well need to be for OU. Some of those in-house guys got to take big steps forward. So I get it. I don't think it's unfair. And probably most people nationally would have that thought, John, that Oh, well, what about that offensive line? Look how much they're replacing. It's easy to see why somebody would go that direction. I just, for me, mentally, when I think about Oklahoma having championship aspirations, it has to start with them being elite defensively.
And that's the thing we've been longing for so long with the Sooners, is that defense would become elite. And that's why he brought Brent Venables, and that's why he brought his coaching staff basically from Clemson, is to help the Sooners defense reach those heights. A player that Oklahoma has been hoping to land in the 2025 recruiting class to help them take another step defensively might not be trending toward Oklahoma anymore. Let's discuss Jonah Williams coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. There's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Monopoly Go, game on. So it was a lot happening on the recruiting front over the weekend, but Monday, Steve Wiltfong, now of On3, dropped a Fong bomb projecting one Jonah Williams to the Texas A&M Aggies. This is a player that had been long favoring Oklahoma, it seemed, and many people had kind of been leaning that direction. There were even, I believe, I can't remember where the predictions came from, but there were a prediction or two that put Oklahoma as the expected landing spot for Jonah Williams. But it kind of seems like the tide has turned a little bit. Now, we are in May. We are 7 months from the early signing period in December. 9 months from National Signing Day next February. So there's a lot still to go down on this recruiting adventure for the Oklahoma Sooners. But I mean, they still got work to do to maybe swing Jonah Williams back their way.
And Steve Wiltfong initially had put in a 24/7 Sports crystal ball for Jonah Williams to Oklahoma back in early February when he was obviously still with 247 Sports. Things change, and clearly the prediction from Steve Wiltfong, at least for the moment, has changed. So he carries typically a lot of weight. He's not batting 1,000. That all-time number at 24/7 Sports was right at 91%. And but you know, a lot of times it feels like his prediction feels like it's the writing on the wall in a lot of recruitments, especially when he has that late flip-flop of a crystal ball or prediction, which we're a long ways off from that. He's already flip-flopped here once, so it's not impossible that Oklahoma could see him flip-flop this thing the other direction. But just general reaction to it, I will not downplay the potential recruiting loss that it would be for Oklahoma if they don't wind up with Jonah Williams. I mean, this is somebody that looks like a definite NFL type talent. Love the size at 6'3", 205. The way that he runs would be a tremendous addition in the defensive backfield. If you wanted to bulk up, he could probably, I don't know, shift over to linebacker. Maybe could even be a possibility for him or Cheetah. I mean, you could do a bunch of different things with Jonah Williams. So I think he's a supreme talent. If it's trending Texas A&M's direction, that's a big time potential recruiting loss for Oklahoma. It's time for Skip Johnson, I guess, right, and company to get on the phone and say, hey, have you been paying attention to this spring on the baseball diamond? Remember, he's a two-sport star, Jonah Williams. And, oh, by the way, Oklahoma's done a pretty good job with two-sport guys. But, yeah, that's disappointing if, in fact, that is the case for Jonah Williams.
This recruitment feels a lot like David Stone in the 2024 class. I don't think it's anywhere close to being over. There was a time where people were trending David Stone to Michigan State. They were trending him to Miami, but ultimately it ended up being Oklahoma. So it's going to be one of those wait and sees. And like you said, you don't want to downplay if this goes towards Texas A&M. That'd be a huge loss for a kid that, by all accounts, loves the University of Oklahoma and had longed to play there. There's a lot of reasons why a kid can kind of turn directions and have a different idea what he wants in a collegiate football experience. But I will say this: Oklahoma's safety depth chart looks a lot better right now than it did a year ago. You're talking about, having Peyton Bowen on the roster still in 2025. You're talking about having maybe Robert Spears-Jennings still on the roster, and that's looking like a much, much better player than what we thought 2 years ago. And then Reggie Powers, Jaden Hardy, Michael Boganowski, Michael Patterson McDonald, all a part of this roster on the depth chart for next year. So you're feeling like, okay, it's going to be okay. You're still going to be really, really stout at safety with or without Jonah Williams. You just hope that it's with, because more depth is always better. You can never have enough talented players on your roster. But it was not just Jonah Williams that was making headlines. The Oklahoma Sooners also received projections for offensive lineman Darius Afalava out of Utah, a 3-star interior offensive line prospect. Josh McCuistion of Sooner Scoop issued that on-3 prediction favoring the Sooners for him. The dude looks like he's got all the size and demeanor to play interior offensive line. Emmanuel Choice, 6'4", 202 wide receiver out of Lancaster High School in Texas. The Sooners received a Rivals future cast from Parker Thune of OU Insider. And then we talked about the Fong bomb for Jonah Williams. Well, Steve Wiltfong also issued a prediction favoring the Sooners for Tristan Haynes, who will commit on Tuesday, presumably to the Oklahoma Sooners. And then Parker of OU Insider also issued a Rivals future cast for 3-star defensive lineman Cade
Petrick.
Thank you, Petrick. So a lot trending toward the Oklahoma Sooners. Any of those stand out to you, Josh, that you're intrigued by?
Yeah, I'm pretty intrigued with defensive lineman Cade Petrick, who would be a potential defensive end in this class. He's out of West Fargo, North Dakota. So look, 6'5", 240 is a big-bodied boy. He's listed as a 3-star. Obviously, he's not on a ton of evaluators' radars, I wouldn't think. Outside of, I don't know what his camping history looks like, but in North Dakota's a lot different than even the Oklahoma City metro. You're going to be on everybody's radar if you're great in the Oklahoma City metro, and that amplifies if you're in Dallas, Houston, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's working against him a little bit. But the early buzz from the Parker Thunes and others of the world is that the head coach, Brent Venables, loves Cade Petrick. So that's an interesting recruitment that it sounds like Oklahoma's a pretty significant leader in. Emmett Jones, I mean, come on. Just another wide receiver to add to the board, probably in short order, and Emmanuel Choice. And as we discussed with one Steve Wiltfong, this is the moment where you really put a lot of stock into Wiltfong's prediction because, well, it's the night of the day before the decision comes down for Tristan Haynes. So his late intel is saying, yes, it's going to be Oklahoma. So that's great news.
Yeah. And so we'll be on the lookout for Tristan Haynes' commitment on May the 7th. This is recorded May the 6th. You'll watch this May the 7th, but we'll have more to say about Tristan Haynes if he ends up choosing Oklahoma or wherever he ends up. We'll talk more about his decision coming up on our next episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow Josh on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KREF Sports app. Follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners. But until next time, he's Josh. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.